I'm on. Bedford trolls me constantly. Hello, everyone. Huh? Every one of them is going to start like this. Bedford just does not know how to count somebody down. I'm going to blame it completely and utterly on him. Anyway, welcome everybody to our October.NET and SQL Server user group. I will be your terribly, terribly spooky host tonight. I will blame all of my technical issues on Bedford. No, but Bedford will be our VJ. Can they see you, Bedford? I don't know. Can you see? Yeah. He's down there. He's down there in the corner. So everybody wave to Bedford. We also have William Assip with us. He is our SQL Server user group leader, and Ryan, who will be one of our presenters for this evening. So I would like to thank y'all for joining us. Be sure to stay engaged with us, interact with the YouTube chat. We will be reading chat throughout the night. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free to leave them in there. If you have any complaints, you can find William on Twitter. He will be happy to field those from you. Anyway, so what else do we have? Again, welcome everybody. Thank you so much. We are out there on social media. You can find us. You can find a SQL server at Baton Rouge SQL or brsSUG.org. You can find the Baton Rouge.NET user group at brdnug.org. You can also use those tags on Twitter. We also have another user group in the area. If you are interested in data analytics, that is headed by Balaji. They meet the fourth Thursday of every month. You can find them at gobrain.org. Let's see, what else do we have? Let's see. We have some upcoming events if you're interested. And I closed all of my tabs, so I actually can't find them right now. That's awesome. So we have SQL Pass. Is SQL Pass Summit. It's going to be virtual this year. It will be November 10th through the 13th. And William informed me that they still have pre-cons for sale. So if you're interested in all things database related, that will be a good source of information for you. Upcoming for the .NET people in November 10th through the 12th, .NET Conf will be live and virtual as usual. So be sure to tune in to that. They'll have some great announcements about the .NET technology and new things coming out there. Let's see. And as usual, if you would like to get involved, we are always looking for speakers. Please reach out to us. Yes, always. We have spots available. You will get to come on our channel, broadcast yourself via the YouTubes. All you have to do is simply join a Teams meeting. We make it as easy as possible for you. Just reach out to us either via social media at any of those tags, or you can join our Discord. Discord's a really good way to get involved. Oh, I just saw it. No Go Brain events until events past February 2020. Got any events? Oh, I thought they okay. So anyway, again. Yeah, always. You want to get involved in the community right now. The best way to do it is going to be virtually. Unfortunately, we are not able to do any in-person meetups for a while, but I mean, we're always active in Discord and trying to broadcast as many user group meetings as we can to you and try to get some information out there. So if you'd like to share, please reach out to us, let us know. Bedford, do you have the list of speakers handy by chance? Informative SQL troll. Informative. All right, so I am up first, so I'm gonna go ahead and yeah, I am very upset because I had this awesome OBS layout with all kinds of cool tricks and things that I was going to be able to have like a professional broadcast. And at the end of the day, it just did not work out. So if I'm gonna go ahead and all right, hold on. It's not letting me share my screen. Stall, Bedford stall. All right, somebody else go. Somebody else go. You would think we'd have this stuff figured out. Sorry, this is my first time presenting.
Hey, so while we're stalling, why don't everybody look at the diploma of Brian's head?
Look at the diploma if you
And
want.
now you'll be able to see anything
perfectly
else.
straight. It is perfectly straight.
Diploma is crooked inside the frame, which is crooked opposed to the door, which is crooked because your house is on a hill.
Okay, all right, I'll take that. All right, I'm good now. Everybody can see me? You can hear me?
Yep.
All right, so what I would like to talk to tonight is anti-patterns. Since we're talking about spooky stories, I figured we could probably talk about things that keep Kenny up at night that I do at work. No, I don't. Actually, I will preface this. None of this stuff that I'm going to show I've done where I currently work at. I will probably tell some stories of an old consulting firm that I used to work at where we just had a bunch of junior developers running around and we probably made all of these mistakes except for one or two. And I'll let y'all know which ones those are when we get here. I would also like for this to be open forum. So if anybody on the call or in the chat has any input, please feel free to provide it, because I just Googled anti-patterns and I was like, hey, I've seen this one. I've seen this one. I've seen this one. So I may not speak to some of the whys you shouldn't do it, but I'm going to see how many times I can invoke William to step in and correct me. So anyway, before we go. So how to keep your DBAs and devs. There are some .NET or some general programmer anti-patterns that I've included in here too that I would be more comfortable speaking about. So first thing we're going to talk about is what is an anti-pattern. Wikipedia says it's a common response to a recurring problem that is usually ineffective and risks being highly counterproductive. So when I go through this, that definition is going to make perfect sense. It's things we copy and paste all over the place. It's quick fixes that we put in that, we're going to come back to later and fix, things of that nature. There are also things that maybe whenever you submit it to your DBA for them to actually run in production or put in the test, they slap your hand and say, yeah, no, we're not doing that. So anyway, talk about that. One of the first things, and something that I run into a lot, especially in apps or production apps, it's this select star. There's probably millions of reasons as to why you don't want to use select star. One of my favorites is database columns change. If you're trying to select something out of a database and putting it into some other database, or if you just have a data reader in your code, columns move around, they change order. That could cause unexpected bugs whenever you're just blindly selecting things out of a database. You probably want to use column specific names and good aliases if that's your thing. One of the things I learned early in my career is to not use a cursor. I actually wrote a very large process that used a cursor because I was a programmer, and how else am I going to control the flow through data if I'm not looping through it? But that is actually something you would probably want to avoid. There is a laundry list of just things that could possibly happen or possibly go wrong if you were to use a cursor in some type of large data transaction. William? No? All right. He's being quiet. This one we've probably all seen before, unfortunately. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is something you want to avoid. You don't want to put any type of secure information and leave that readable in your database. There are times where I've seen these in really old apps. Apparently, it was a common practice at one time, but it's something you want to avoid nowadays. And if nothing else, you don't want to put database passwords in your database at all. There are plenty of services out there that will handle your authentication for you, and it's probably something you want to look at offloading to a third-party process if at all possible. This is another one. You don't want to be on the news. Nobody wants to be on the news. Again, if you don't have to store it, don't. That is the best thing. And this is one that I've actually never seen. So I've seen human readable passwords in old apps. I can honestly say, thank God, in the consulting world, I've never come across an old app that our company had inherited or maintained that actually had human readable social security fields. That's just, let's face it, that's just not good. It's not something you want to do. I've seen a lot of stuff around like. I really can't speak to it a whole lot. I just know that it does some funky parsing and things. Yeah, I probably should have took this one out. One thing I do see in a lot of older apps is meaningless table aliases. You have an old app where you're doing a whole lot of joins to a whole lot of databases. One thing you'll see is, UT dot first name for a user table. It's not readable. It's not maintainable. The person who comes behind you is not going to be a fan whenever they have to basically use your where calls as a key, or your joins, your from statement as a key to what table you're actually trying to pull data out of. So be kind to the people coming behind you. Use meaningful table aliases to make it that much easier for them to actually step through your SQL statements and find the information that they're actually looking for to maintain the application. Something fun that you see, and I've run into quite a lot, is people not normalizing their database tables. A lot of times what will happen is they will lift and shift their Excel spreadsheet and they will put it into the database. You'll have 256 columns, half of which aren't used, that you have to maintain and carry through and actually try to run transactions through. A lot of times what will end up happening is some of the people that I would work with justify that it's faster for reporting, and that may be the case. There are processes to make tables friendly for reporting. You can also have reporting tables. I know there are some people here that love ETL. Allow them to actually take your data and transfer it somewhere else for your reporting. This is just something that you want to be conscious of. And on the flip side, you don't want to over normalize your tables. A lot of developers are probably going to be guilty of this. Normalize everything as much as they can for extendability. But sometimes you'll run across kind of a premature optimization situation where you don't necessarily need to do it just because you can, or don't necessarily do it just because you can. Make sure you do it for the right reasons. We all want to keep our databases clean and shaped well, so that way they will last us years into the future without having to do constant rewrites. The normalizing is an effective tool whenever you use it properly. But just make sure that you don't over or under normalize your databases. There's no need. This one I'm glad to see disappearing. I don't see it often, but let's face it, it's really, really easy to go ahead and just pass that SQL Server username and password around, give that user whatever access they actually need to the database, and everybody's happy, right? Because everybody just automatically has access to the databases that they need. I know sometimes requesting service accounts, requesting access for those service accounts can be a tad bit tedious, but at the end of the day, whenever things need to migrate, things need to be shut down, things need to be secured, having those service accounts actually up and running are going to be your best friends. So be sure to, if you can at all possibly do it, avoid just using your plain old SQL Server login accounts for accessing databases. Another fun one you see in old legacy apps, and something you should probably avoid doing, is repurpose those fields or columns. that just becomes a maintenance nightmare at the end of the day. You don't know what that column's for. You don't know why it's there. And then whenever the data doesn't actually match the column's name, it really starts to throw you through a loop and it doesn't make any sense. But it's really easy because you don't want to delete the column because it's there and somebody might use it for something. You don't want to add another column because nobody ever normalized these tables. And there's already 70 something columns on this table and you don't want to add another one. So it's really, it could be, I don't know, you can find people who want to do it all the time. It's not something you should probably do. There's a lot of fun discussions you can have around storing time, date times, or timestamps inside of databases. Most people you'll hear argue to use a UTC. Some people I've seen actually say this user did this in their time zone and then try to store that time zone and then try to recalculate based off of that time zone. Or you could just be like Google, who says Pacific time zone is the only one that matters and we don't care about anything else. I believe Stack Overflow has a similar philosophy. The one thing you want to make sure you do is keep it consistent. If you can, date time offset and UTC time zone is going to be your friend at the end of the day. But sometimes you end up inheriting something and that's not necessarily a luxury that you have, a decision that you get to make. This is my favorite because this is the one I'm the most guilty of, is using varchar max. It's easy. Entity Framework does it for you out of the box. You don't have to worry about anything else except for whenever you get a call from your DBA saying, no, don't do that. The size of your columns matter, and that's all you really need to know. So please stay away from varchar max. Only store the size that you need and be happy with that, I guess. Blindly trusting user input is, again, something you don't want to do. Some things I see is people concatenating strings where they just take whatever comes from the text box and they shove it into a SQL statement and run it against the database. That is not secure. That is not good. There are a lot of ways around it. You can run parameterized queries. You can, I know in the .NET space, there's a lot of tools that will help construct your SQL statements for you and actually clean the input that is coming from the user. So you may want to take advantage of those tools if they're around and you can. If not, there are plenty of articles out there that will teach you how to sanitize your input. I know one company that I worked with, ours actually revolved around query strings. Once people realized that they can mess with query strings and actually have different types of output on the page that they were navigating to, they just went crazy with it. We had hundreds of errors a night over people putting in invalid query string values. If a user can do it, they're going to try to do it. So one good thing is we could just use Entity Framework for all this stuff, and we don't have to worry about it. Right, William? No? God. All right, I'll truly try. But anyway, I believe we could have a discussion just on Entity Framework and poor practices with it. Like I said, varchar max you get out of the box. Be sure to put attributes on your fields and make sure you actually research the tool before you try to use it. Entity Framework is not that bad, but it can be in the wrong situations. So now we'll get to more developer-centric things that I feel more comfortable talking about. I'm not a big fan of the SQL side. I use Entity Framework, so that way I don't actually have to write any SQL. But this is nice. One of my pet peeves is just throwing null reference exceptions or just throwing generic exceptions in general. They don't do anybody any good. The best thing you can do is create custom exceptions that explicitly state what failed in your application if you have that luxury. A lot of times, especially in null reference exceptions, you can use guard clauses or some other framework that will actually say, hey, this object, and tell you what object it is that we're trying to access on this line of code is empty. That way, whenever your developers get their error reports and they go into the app, they know exactly where to go and how to fix the situation. So please don't just throw generic exceptions. Make sure you throw good quality exceptions and if all possible, create custom exceptions to throw. I don't really see this too often, but every once in a while I'll see somebody who is tempted to use them. It's becoming more and more, I see it done more and more in practice, specifically around some Entity Framework and domain-driven design use cases, even though it kind of breaks encapsulation, which is what you want out of your domain objects. The tooling that you have and everything in .NET makes it really easy for you to generate your public properties, which are getters and setters. You want to make sure that the class that's actually owns the property has final say in any of the functionality that revolves around it, especially when it comes to getting and setting properties or just acting on your properties and your class in general. So that's something that I see that people should probably tend to avoid. This is another one of my favorites. If you ever have an application that is just ungodly and memory is getting out of control and you have to constantly recycle app pools, it's probably because somebody didn't dispose of something that was disposable. This goes along with using statements properly. You can put every disposable in a using statement. It automatically wraps it in your try catch finally for you and disposes your objects. If you're not sure and whatever you're using is some type of client or whatever you're using is accessing something that doesn't belong to your application, just do .dispose at the end, see what happens. You may find that you actually need to dispose an object that you wasn't aware of that you needed to dispose. It's really easy to do. It's something to have in the back of your mind. This is a problem that I've seen quite a lot throughout my career. And I guess at the end of the day, it made me look like I knew what I was doing because I just had to dispose of a couple of SQL connections and we never had any problems with the app again. So like I said, it happens far more commonly than you would imagine. And it usually leads to this. So you're having memory problems, you're not disposing things properly. Somebody does a Google search, what do they see? Invoke the garbage collector. Let the garbage collector go and clean up something that's hanging around in memory and lower your memory usage. Please don't do that. At the end of the day, just don't invoke the garbage collector ever for any reason whatsoever. .NET has done a really good job at collecting garbage over the years. They continue to do a really good job. Allow them to do that good job. You don't want to take something out of memory that shouldn't have been taken out of memory. You don't want to interrupt the garbage collector if it's already actually been invoked by whatever other process that controls it. It's just something that if you see in the code review, you probably don't want to let go through. Ask them why they're doing it, discuss why they're doing it, and odds are they're probably not disposing something that should be disposed. This goes along with the memory management. I don't know. Some people may not understand why. At the end of the day, strings aren't immutable. Sorry. Whenever you concatenate two strings together, you actually get three strings, not one. So the way it gets handled in memory, it just doesn't overwrite itself. It just creates a new copy. If you start doing this over and over and over again, you're going to start filling up your memory. You're going to start running into memory issues. Your app pools are going to start hanging up and somebody's going to want to call the garbage collector. So that's not what we want to do. We want to be mindful of concatenating a large number of strings. If you inherit some older software, odds are they're doing this concatenation because String Builder didn't come along until, I guess, more recent years, depending on how long your development life is. But so this is something that I actually have run into a lot. And a lot of times this concatenating large number of strings revolves around taking the user input and building dynamic SQL statements to run against the database. It's really easy to do. It's really easy to get yourself in trouble. There are a lot of tools that are going to help solve these problems. Dapper and Entity Framework among two of them that I use most of the time. We want to make sure we sanitize that input that comes in from our users. We want to make sure we build our strings responsibly, and we want to make sure to dispose of all of those connections when we're done. That's going to save us a lot of headache in the long run when we deal with memory issues inside of our web applications. Another one that I've seen, which is an older pattern, is God classes. I know back in the WinForms days, we had one base class that did everything. It was probably hundreds and hundreds of lines long. It had a whole bunch of generic methods that revolved around session and other things. Sometimes these will turn into utility classes. We have a utility class. We can put any kind of string manipulation on there. We can put any kind of oddball calculation on there. Creating God classes, they become unmanageable, unmaintainable. They become untestable. You start breaking a lot of solid principles that revolve around the fact that you shouldn't be modifying your classes after the fact. One thing I like to say, our classes are free. They don't cost much. You can create as many as you want, as often as you want. So if you ever get into a situation where you want to start throwing things into a single class, I'd rather have a bunch of classes with a single method on it. So that way you know that there's no reason for you to ever go in that class again and start modifying things in there. And we just keep our code nice and clean. Again, it's kind of at least the first one. Don't be afraid to create new classes. Like I said, they're free. You could make them once, put them somewhere. If there's ever a bug, ideally you threw a good exception. You know where it happened. You can go and fix that single class that was being the problem and allow that fix to cascade throughout the rest of your application. This one's always fun, is magic numbers and strings. Most of the time I see people violate this is going to be around configurations. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people try to put base URIs for other web APIs that their application is calling, or putting SQL connection strings in their configuration classes. I mean, anything like that. I know a lot of times it's really easy just to go ahead and put the number in the if statement or anything of those natures, of that nature. Constant classes are going to be your friend. Configuration classes that actually read your configuration files are going to be your friend. You're going to appreciate them much later down the road whenever you actually need to go and modify something, especially if it's in the configuration class. I mean, in the configuration file, and you don't actually want to have to rebuild your application and go through your development process, your deployment process all over again. Let's see what else. Like I said, constant classes are very easy to make. Sometimes you don't even want to put strings in your application as far as text for like displaying inside a website. There are resource files that you can actually extract out, and then you can have them translated to other languages, and you just reference those files. That way your application is just free of just general text, and you can offset all that work into another file, and that'd be great. This is my biggest pet peeve, and this is the one that I actually see the most, is we spend a lot of time and effort, and our company spend a lot of money on the tooling that you get to use. ReSharper is a fantastic thing. I use it every day. It is probably the most important tool that I have in my tool bag. It helps speed up my development insanely. I think investing in your tooling is a worthwhile investment, and it's something that you should continue to do throughout your career. There's too many people I see just, using their mouse for file new project or other things. Now, your mouse is an important tool in itself. I'm not saying don't use it. It's just there are some things that you can do quicker with a keyboard shortcut, or there are some things that the tooling will point out to you and say, hey, this is a potential bug. Why don't you fix it? Or if you just want to create a new class, or if you want to create new methods, a lot of tools out there do a lot of refactoring for you. So I just wanted to make that point that learning your tooling is important, and it's something you should invest time in. And yeah, anyway, that's all I really had. Yeah, I know. That's all I really had. I figured we were doing short talks. So I just wanted to run through a couple of things that I see or seen throughout my career that I know some people out there may think is common knowledge, but it's not. A lot of times these things are violated due to maybe speed of building the application, building up that technical debt because they want that job security. They don't want their they don't want somebody coming in behind them and taking their apps away or whatever their reason is. I know I've been guilty of almost all of these things. Other than displaying people's information. I just want to be pretty clear about that. Like, that's not something, I don't think I've ever actually written an app that stored a password. So, anyway, that's all I have. Yay. Oop, oop. Am I on time or am I too early? That's what I was hoping for. I figured we were doing a shorter talk, so you're welcome.
All right. I don't think, I just want one person to confirm they can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. I tried it, connected my headphones via Bluetooth to my computer for the first time today. I wasn't sure if it was going to work good or not. Okay, let me share. I'm going to share screen number 1. Okay, and let me open up my presentation here. Okay, maybe if one person can confirm they can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, good deal. Okay, so confession up front, I was a little jumped when they asked submissions to speak. I did not fully read the top. The theme was going to be scary stories and whatnot, and I had something already, whatever, committed in my brain. Like, okay, I'm going to talk about this. So this won't be too like. There's not much personal history or horrible experience in this, but anyway, I dressed it up with a little Halloween theme here. So this is a continuation somewhat of what I spoke about last month, which was PWA, progressive web apps. And my topic had to do with running a progressive web app outside of the browser. And so this is also, now you don't, before I jump ahead, you don't need to run your web app as PWA to use IndexedDB, but it could be very likely that you would want to for reasons I'm about to get into. So anyway, that's how I got here with this topic. It was a continuation of something I started last month. Okay, so a little bit about me. Of course, my name is Ron Richard. I'm currently a contract software developer here in BR, and there's my email address if you want to get in touch with me. I also have LinkedIn page, pretty easy to find on there. What are we talking about here? Let me skip down to the last bullet point, which is scenario Core Mobile. Core Mobile was an app I worked on recently for a client where they said, we think we want a mobile app because we need to go out into places where we don't expect to have internet coverage, and we need to store data. And then we come back to when we do have network connectivity, we want to be able to upload data and synchronize our data. And so it's the traditional scenario of a mobile app, in general, that needs to run offline. So we got to talking about it, and they didn't really want to commit to writing a full-fledged native mobile app. So we decided to go with a web app, and the web app would have offline storage capability. And so that's how I got to start using this framework that's built into your browser that's called IndexedDB. So the web app that we ended up developing for this client, it's a PWA, so it can run offline. The entire app can run offline without the network connectivity, and that's kind of what I demoed last month. And then also we can store data locally in the browser, and it's persistent storage, so it's between browser sessions. You won't lose your data. And then, when you do get connectivity, you can synchronize your data up to, the web server. So anyway, that's how, so if there's such as what I just talked about, then you want to consider the IndexedDB. So again, some of the things here on this screen. So if you need to store structured data, let me say that. If you need to store just a variable here and there, well, this is too much for you. But structured as in it doesn't really correspond directly to, say, tables as in a database, but the data is definitely structured, like as if it's certain classes that you want to store. Offline or online or offline access. So IndexedDB is integrated like with your browser, and it really has nothing to do with if you have internet access or not. But if you do need to store data for offline scenarios and then synchronize it later, then this may be what you want to do. And why I just kind of went through that. The scenario is, okay, I have to be able to run offline, or maybe not, and then data locally. And of course, with a native mobile app, then you may just want to go and, because you're installing things into the device, you may be able to use some third-party database program. But if you're going to stick with a web app that runs in the browser, then IndexedDB is going to be choice. Okay, so the definition, if you go to Mozilla's website, they have a very good definition of the IndexedDB API. And one thing about it is, I'm jumping ahead here because I'm thinking about it. It's JavaScript based, so you can definitely go and just write it, using the native API. But there are libraries, there are things that you can pull down to that wrap the API calls, and so you don't have to do the low level. I say low level. You don't have to do the direct programming. You can find some JavaScript libraries or modules out there that already wrap this for you. Make it much easier. Structured data. We're not really talking about tables per se. We're talking more about storing objects. So when you define your IndexedDB, you have to define some rules, let's say, that are going to determine what you store. But literally, you're not really storing tables. You don't have to define field by field and whatnot. Basically, just enough information about each type of object. That's all you have to do. Stores and indexes. So a store is basically corresponds to an object type that you're going to store. And there are some indexes involved here, very limited. I'll speak a little bit more about this later. You can think of this as a database, but you have very limited type of features in there that you would get from a full-fledged database. So these are really just kind of limited indexes. Okay. So like I said, I didn't even try to write use the direct API in JavaScript to do my IndexedDB implementation. I typically write Angular apps. So there's a good Angular library here, NGX IndexedDB, that I use to wrap around the index DB and make all the calls through that. So if you do use Angular, this is a very good for me. And it simplified things a lot. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit of code in the app here, and then I'm going to run the app and I'll demonstrate how read and write data from the index DB. So as I said, so this is a little demo that I just called PWA demo, Progressive Web App Demo. But it doesn't do a whole lot, but it is a PWA, and it just has a very simple use of the index DB. Okay, so I'm going to jump in and show you in the Angular code how this is implemented. And if you haven't used Angular before, the concepts I think will still be the same if you use another JavaScript library or just implement it directly. Let me jump over to code here. Again, if you're familiar with Angular, you know that you typically have a module, an app module, or something that controls and defines your application at the highest level, let's say. So again, I use this library called ngx index DB, and it has a couple of things here that we use to define and access our database. So this chunk of code right here is basically how we define our database. So this is the name I'm going to give the database. We have versions here, which if you had to upgrade a database in place, you would use versioning. I won't go into that today. But you could roll out a database and 6 months later you have to update it because people could be using it out there. So you would use this version to think of it almost as a migration. And then now our object store metadata here. So basically, I'm creating one store, which I'm going to call employee. And it's going to have now you could almost think of this comparably as an identity column in a SQL table. And then, typically you would call that ID with, auto increment. And then now these two things here actually indexes, even though they don't say that. But I'm going to create an index on the first name and the last name. Now, if I open up the employee model that I'm actually using in the app, you'll notice there's two fields here, title and role, that I don't mention over here. That's because we're just storing an object. And I mean, I could have 100 properties on this object, but all I really need to do is say, what is my ID field, and then any indexes that I might want to use. And again, as I said, you're very limited in how you can use these indexes, but I can literally search this store for first name equal to Bob. So I can do that. But complex queries and whatnot, and you can't really use. So anyway, so this is going to be my table. I say table. This is going to be my store or whatever that I'm going to have in my database. Let me show you one other thing here. So, of course, with Angular, you have this concept of services that you use all over the place. And then, it has dependency injection, so you can inject service. So now this service is what I use to actually talk to the index DB. This is another class that I get from this library, and I'm calling it DB service. So this is actually where, let's say I want to get all of my employees from my employee table. I would call this get all is actually in that library class that I get from my from this library. So this is actually the DB index DB call right here. I'm going to pass in the name employee. If I want to get all my employees, I call this and pass the name of the table, which I guess it's actually a store. And then this will give me all that back. And then this has promises that I can configure callbacks for. When I'm done, this is what I want to do, and then error catching. And I've wrapped that in observable because Angular is more geared towards using observables versus promises. But anyway, so the point here is that you're going to have to write sort of an abstraction layer that sits and talks to your index DB, and I just call it cache service. So my app is going to call my cache service to get data. And then the only thing I'm going to store right now is an employee. So if I run this app, and go make sure it's running over here, and it is. This is an Angular command line. I'm just telling it to run my app, and it actually fires up a little web server that hosts the app. So I just have to go to that port. And then let me switch over to here. And then if I do localhost. Okay, so now here's our little demo. And I'm gonna hit the developer tools. And now we don't have an index DB here yet because we haven't tried to access it. If I do an empty cache and hard reload, I don't have anything there. If I click on employees, okay, I just queried it. So now I have an employee table, and it's got an index on the first name and the last name. And you can see here it says the key is actually ID. So you get in the dev tools, you get this little basically this, which I haven't looked to see if there's any other way that gives you more extensive querying ability, just to poke around in here. But you do get a little bit of options for browsing your data in here. Okay, so if I do new employee, I always do Bill Gates, just out of habit. All right, now it's not here because I'm not refreshing my list, but if I go back to employees, okay, so now I got a record. So if I go here and I refresh here, okay, now I have a record in my database. And you can see here, the key is 1. And then it shows you, see, as I was saying, you're not really storing table storage, you're storing an object. So it shows you right here what your object is that you're storing. Okay, so I have to stop for just a second. No, there she is. Okay. Catherine, I'm on the call for work. I'm sorry. Okay, come on. Okay, sorry, kid interruption. Okay, so you can see here that we have some data. We have a record in here, and you can see it automatically gave it an ID. So if I give it a new employee here, that would be Steve Ballmer. Save those changes, and then if I refresh here, so I have 2. So you can see the auto increment, just like an ID in SQL. Browse and see your object here, and then if you did go down to these index fields, it'll show you, first name. You can see here it'll break down your data by this index. We said first name, so it shows you have 2 values in there. So like I said, this thing is persisted. So if I close Chrome and then relaunch it, it's going to make it difficult for me to get back to my. So if I launch, so here I go back with Chrome, back here, my data is there. So it's persisted data. It's stored somewhere, I don't know, maybe in your user profile in Windows, something like that. App data. We can delete the database, so, okay, it's gone. The app will recreate it. Okay, so it just comes right back. So you have a little bit of flexibility there with deleting it and recreating it, but you have to be careful. You don't want to leave your data out there. If you are doing synchronization, you don't want it to sit out there for too long without synchronizing it. Okay, so back to here for our wrap up. So that was our demo. We have you can browse in DevTools to see your data, and it's persisted between your sessions. I don't know how long it'll last, probably as long as you let it sit there. So some notes. The database won't show up until you actually access it. I actually wasted 2 hours writing the demo app because I kept waiting for the database to show up, and it didn't show up until I actually tried to query it or something. So anyway, no referential integrity, no complex queries, no join queries. So anytime you get beyond just give me a few records from the table, you have to get creative. You have to like get all the records from one table and get the records from another table and iterate through one table and find the records from the other table if you're going to do joins. I had to do that. You do have cursors, so within the IndexedDB API. So if you did need to do a scan, let's say, of all the records in one of your tables, then you can use the DB. The IndexedDB has a cursor. You don't have to write it manually. You could say you can have it scan all the records and give it a criteria. But it makes it difficult. But if your data is pretty simple, you can manage it. Like I said, if you write your own sort of database layer to sit on top of it. And that was everything I had. So this is a wrap up screen. This is something my daughter made. So I don't know. I told her to let me have it so I could put it in my slideshow.
Perfect.
It's well, let me go back.
Also, sorry that your daughter was murdered during the middle of your presentation.
Yeah. Well, she went over to the neighbor's house, and I said, just please try to time it when I'm not actually talking. But of course, that didn't work.
Yeah, they were close.
So that's it. Yeah. Okay. So that's it. Oh, yeah. I know, Jeremy. I have not gotten to that point where I had to go and figure that out. I have run an app with IndexedDB on Android and iOS, and they both supported it, Chrome and then Safari, respectively. Yeah, I kind of saw the same thing in research that your storage should be fine as long as you don't make the mobile operating system angry about, how a lot of them have their smart storage or whatever, they go in and look at data maybe and try to purge it for you. I'm do it, but I think if you're careful about it and, tell your users, hey, don't make sure that your phone doesn't have, less than a gig of storage or something, then you're probably okay. And I have to say too, the app that I was speaking of, the Core Mobile, which I couldn't show because it's proprietary, but I put something like 10,000 records in one table and maybe 20 in another. So maybe 8 tables with 5,000 records each, and it really only used like 5 megs of storage. So it, I mean, you want to be careful not to put too much, but I wouldn't think the OS would have that much issue with it. It should not. I mean, it should not. It's storage that belongs to the browser app, so it should not go after it. If it's doing a cleanup, I would think. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. Oh, I need to stop for a second. Okay.
Nice.
Spooky Seagull. First, I'd like to do a little myth busting.
No myth busting. You don't need to. You're good. You're good. You don't need to.
On a certain background artifact in the presentation right now.
It's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. Do you break out paint?
Yeah. I'd just like to point out that mathematically, the frame, the door, and the diploma itself are not in sync with each other. They're not synchronized.
Well, you can see from that picture that the diploma is actually shifted inside of the frame to make it level.
Because of gravitational anomalies. Also, I did a zoom and enhance on the diploma there, and I didn't know, Brian, that you graduated from your high school name here.
Hey, look, some places don't do very good background checks. I don't know what to tell you. That's not my problem.
Like us, obviously. Okay, here we go. Welcome to Spooky Sequel. Today, we are going to talk about scary stories, about how to avoid frightening non-sequential new sequential GUIDs. You thought we weren't going to talk about GUIDs, Stacy? Shocking foreign key behavior and duplicate primary key terror. Features of night brought to light. Number 1, behold the fright of the new sequential ID. To set the stage, we have a simple table where we have an ID column that's a unique identifier on a constraint that specifies the new sequential ID function, something that developers like to say, but what about whenever I challenge the whole unique identifier thing being useless in tables? I ran some inserts, caused some things to happen, and then, look, I'm sorting by the ID ascending, but when observed, the time is changed. It is no longer inserting data sequentially. Newer data is going in the table before older data. So here's the expected behavior of new sequential ID. A server change happens, it keeps going in the same order. What actually happens is that the server seed can change, and now we have data being written all over the table, creating fragmentation upon insertion, just as if we were using a perfectly random key. A clustered index should not be based on a random key in SQL Server. The UUID create sequential function is based on the MAC address of the NIC. So the new sequential ID seed can change on any change to the server's NIC MAC. Now you're thinking, oh, that can never happen. But actually it can happen in a lot of different ways. In a failover to a failover cluster or an availability group is a different server with a different NIC. Now you've got a different seed. Any upgrade or migration from a new hardware platform to another, new seed, new NIC, you're writing out of order sequential data all over again. A change in the tier of the Azure SQL database if you're running a PaaS offering. Re-imaging an Azure VM with an ephemeral OS, that's more of an edge case. Running Docker without it specifying an explicit MAC whenever you start up the container. Different seed for the new sequential ID. And then on startup of a VM, this is documented in both VMware and Hyper-V that the MAC address of a powered off virtual machine may not be remembered and may be regenerated. So you cannot trust the new sequential ID. Don't trust it. Use identity or sequence containers with an integer or a big int field like a grown-up instead. If you need to merge data in because you have multi-master rights, then just use 2 integers. One that's a sequence in the table and one that identifies where the data is coming from. 2 integers, that's only 8 bytes. That's half the size of a GUID, and it's still sequential, and it has business meaning. This is commonly approached in what's called the oil rig scenario, which down here is very common, where you've got all these rigs out in the Gulf, and we all need to write data back to home base. And they're all originating the data on the rig and temporarily or transiently writing the data back home. So people say, well, you got to use a unique identifier, so I can't have any conflicts when I write the data into the table. Wrong. One, a unique identifier is only guaranteed to be unique on the same server. It's not guaranteed to be unique in the entire universe of servers that exist out there. And 2, you know what rig you're on. That's the second integer. So you got an identity column and you got the second integer. each local to each rig, and you're writing 2 integers, none of which will ever overlap while still being perfectly sequential, a compound key. There's your solution. Now, that's scary about the whole, getting out of order thing, but that's nothing compared to shocking foreign key behavior. So imagine a simple query where I'm joining 2 tables together and getting data out of one of the tables. Here's the execution plan for such a query. I've got a clustered index scan on one table and a clustered index scan on the other table, and a match to join them together. Now I'm going to add a foreign key between these 2 tables on the child table, referencing the parent table, table1.id. And look, it's gone. The other clustered index scan was eliminated from the execution plan. We were able to get everything we needed to get out of just the one table because of the power of the foreign key and the assumptions it could make, and it cut the cost in half by 1/5 of this query without changing code, without changing indexes. That's powerful stuff. So, spooky side. On a night very much like this, actually it was in the morning, on a day very much like this, in the South, at a SQL Saturday in Pensacola many years ago, I tried this same demo and it didn't work. The scans stayed despite my foreign key being there. SQL Server still wanted to use both tables. Why? Why might this not work in a demo, aside from just rules about demos always breaking? It's because the foreign key that I had created and scripted out and wasn't paying attention was created, it was enabled, but it was not trusted. And so you can see here in this simple syntax right here, looking up at some of the metadata in SQL Server, that the foreign key was created, enforced on new data, but was created without trust on existing data. This is a way that SQL Server Management Studio commonly scripts out foreign keys. It'll script it out like this. The foreign key is created, enabled, but not trusted for foreign key. And this is a way that the foreign key can get into place without failing and having to evaluate all the data at the time. So if you ever see this in your scripts with no check, that's what it's doing. It's essentially saying, put the foreign key in, assume everything's fine. But what if it isn't? And then, of course, if you can't assume everything's fine, it can't make certain assumptions about the relationships between the data in those 2 tables. And so no performance benefits. So instead of what normally follows this script back here is SQL Server will also script out alter table check constraint. What you have to do is alter table with check constraint. That's right, with check constraint. This is valid syntax and you have to know how to do it. After executing the with check, now the foreign key is no longer not trusted and can be used for performance assumptions by SQL Server. So go take this same script, look for this is not trusted foreign key, and get your foreign keys trusted so you can start getting the performance benefits that come with them. Now, if you thought that was scary, check out duplicate primary key horror. Many businesses have an invoice or line item or reference number system that looks like this, maybe like a year, an invoice number, and then a line item, which is stored to the right of the decimal point. If you were to store this data in a float data type, you could get into some really scary situations because float and its alias real are floating point data types in SQL Server and many other platforms, by the way. This isn't special to SQL Server. Approximate numeric data types like this that use floating point math do not store exact values. This isn't an urban legend. This is documented fact. You should really only use the float data type or floating point math to begin with across any platform or data storage if the maximum precision of the data, number of digits that you need, is over 38 in SQL Server or whatever it is in any platform that you're using. If that max precision is insufficient and you're okay with rounded off results. Avoid the use of float real columns in the where clause. Can you imagine? So you have been warned. In different platforms, floating point data types might be named float or double, which is a default in many programming languages, or real, or just number. We all hate JavaScript, I know. Watch out for the defaults. Double is often a default. Don't use these data types. Use something that is fixed, like decimal or numeric. Always, 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 most of the time, use decimal with a precision and a scale unless you really, really know what you're doing. Now I have a simple and very scary laboratory demonstration here from my SQL Server Laboratory of Horror. I'm going to go ahead and create a table with a float data type on the primary key. Very scary, right? Very, very scary. By the way, this is an Azure SQL database, but it would work on any SQL Server version going back through time. I'm going to go ahead and insert 8 rows, and you notice I'm using this very common invoice line item configuration right here, right? I got 8 invoices, 1 through 8. Let me go ahead and select the data, and oh my gosh, look at that. Would you look at that? Would you look at that? I can't zoom in on that. I should have zoomed in on that. I should have zoomed in on that. I should have zoomed in on that. Anyway, look at that. You're not getting the actual values out of there. You're getting duplicate values out of what's supposed to be your primary key. To display the actual data, I have to convert my float data on demand into decimal, in which case it would actually return the real data. And now I am seeing the actual things that I thought I had inserted. Now, but what if I copy this data into another system, like a data warehouse, a reporting platform, or a competitor software in the future, long after I have left this job, to a database that has grown up data types, like decimal, as you can see here, and have higher precision requirements? I could insert this data into this table, and then look at what I've got. Holy cow, I've got much different data in my database than I had before. That, my friends, is scary. Also, one more super scary thing, that was in Management Studio. If I try to do the same thing to look at that data in Azure Data Studio, because Azure Data Studio is basically just a JavaScript application running in Windows, I'm getting the real data out. That's spooky. I had to do this demo in Management Studio. It took me a little while to figure that out. Anyway, so I hope you're not too scared off from enjoying the rest of this evening, which we're going to talk about Excel spreadsheets and how they're evil. And this little information about me, I'm going to post all the scripts and the demos for this presentation at my blog at SQLTech.com. Thank you very much for joining us tonight at the Baton Rouge User Groups.
William is using JavaScript, even though it's an application form. He's using it.
Wow, right?
So, you can't get away from it these days. It's all over the place. So.
Yeah, any questions? Tell your daughters, regardless of what they say, never trust foreign keys. Oh, it's dark. SQL like an adult.
Yeah, you really do.
Should come with a pacemaker warning. All the hate on JavaScript. I'm a database administrator. It's in my religion to hate JavaScript.
And we're .NET developers, so I mean, we're just coming. I mean, we've actually wrapped JavaScript in C# and WebAssembly because we didn't want to deal with it.
And I wrap JavaScript in newspaper and throw it away.
Yeah.
Can we get Microsoft to stop using float in their apps too? I know, right? Get rid of those defaults. Stop using floating point stuff. If you don't have data to the right of the decimal point, just use an int, like an adult does. I demand an adult data type in SQL Server 2022.
This is awesome. This is
All
awesome.
right. All right, well, take it away, Bedford.
I don't think anybody wants to talk about Excel by choice.
Oh, hey, hold on, Bedford. Bedford, they're saying they can't hear you. Can y'all hear me in the chat? No, the chat's a little delayed, so it might take a little
Yeah.
bit.
And maybe an OBS thing.
I can hear you, but they're saying they can't hear you, Bedford. Hey, so while they're figuring that out, okay, so they can hear me. Spooky technical issues. While Bedford's figuring that out, the money data type. So money is just an alias for the decimal data type. But quick, what's the precision and scale of the money data type? Tell me right now. Tell me right now. Nobody can remember. So that's why you don't use the money data type, because it's vague. People have to look up exactly how many points to the right of the decimal point it's specifying, for example. Just use decimal and specify a precision and scale that's transparent to everybody. 17.9. Thank you, Dwayne.
Oh my God. Have I been
19.4. Thank you, Dwayne. Actually, I don't remember money either, because I make it a point to forget every time I try to remember it, just to prove this point about not using money. All right, can y'all hear Bedford yet?
have I been muted this entire thing?
Not this entire time. It can't have been this entire time.
That'd be absolutely spooky. Well, anyway, so what's been okay, so here's the discussion tonight. So we're doing this roundtable
Right,
thing.
we can hear you now. We're good to go. Back to spooky spreadsheets.
Yeah, so we're doing this roundtable thing tonight, and we're just going to be discussing a current event topic. We're going to do this during the live streams from now on. What we're discussing tonight is a spooky Excel spreadsheet error, quote unquote error. So Public Health England has been tracking COVID test results and tracking, positive people who are positive for coronavirus and trying to figure out where it's going. And so recently they had a big spike in cases, and what they found out is that there was an Excel glitch, quote unquote. And further digging shows that they've been using an Excel spreadsheet to store all of their data. And so, that's not too bad. That's SQL. Excel can take about 1 million or something records, but it's not records, because they were all also storing them, each test result, in a per row basis. Every test is a row, and so up and down. And so what?
Column. Every test is a column.
Yeah, column. My bad.
Which means you
column.
have to read the data from top to bottom.
From top to bottom. So what I would like to discuss is why might have that have been the choice that they made, first of all, because obviously the decision was made. Maybe it was for a reason, what are some common things? And this is stuff that the reason I want to discuss this is because it is very common. I have seen stuff like this many times. And a lot of the times it's budget constraints, or that there aren't DBAs around, and as part of those budget constraints, it's not like they can hire a DBA or a programmer. Usually the IT everybody person gets roped into it and just has to build this thing from scratch yesterday. And so what might be some common reasons for having used that sort of method, and what are maybe some better alternatives for people that are strapped, right?
Yeah, so I always suggest that this whole thing in England happened for exactly that reason, because it was non-IT people trying to do a data interchange. And for most non-IT people, and my HR wife is in the crowd, so she can attest to this, the database that they think is a database is an Excel spreadsheet. Or these days, we'd be even better with a Google Sheet. I mean, that'd be better than nothing. In this case, they not only sent the data around England as an Excel spreadsheet, but in the old XLS format from 2003, which has a limit of the number of rows it can contain. And so things were cut off when they tried to export the data from whatever application they were using into an XLS file, not even an XLSX file, which has like a 2 gigabyte limit. But I've done work before for for private companies trying to communicate data to public enterprises, public agencies and stuff like that, where it has to be exported into really raw formats. I did one where it was hazardous waste sampling data out of the ground that had to be filled into a specific Access database from Access 97. So this company, to turn in the results of their study, had to find and install Access 97, and this is in the late 2000s, and then manually convert data into that old thing from whatever system that they actually had. And that's just the only way that the data would be accepted. And this is what happens when scientists or doctors or whoever go cheap on IT. They don't hire an actual IT person to set up like an API or a data exchange, or again, at least like a Google form with a Google sheet behind it or something like that, which would not be better. That would just be another alternative.
Yeah, chat saying that they didn't want to pay for Microsoft 365. They still got that old Office 2003 installed. And fun fact, they were using XLS files, and it's probably for that exact reason.
Yep.
Because someone in the office didn't want to upgrade and made everybody stick to Office 2003. Jeremy says security through obsolescence.
There's no way anybody can hack this. It's from the 70s.
That's fun because I've also heard that excuse on COBOL mainframes. Well, nobody knows how to get into these anymore, so I guess they're all safe. And I mean, it's true though.
That just means all the exploits are well documented.
Yes, they've been around for a while.
Lotus 123 would have been more secure.
If it's on-prem and it's not in the cloud, then nobody can get to.
That's right. You're behind a firewall, right? That's the excuse. That's the reason.
So how many of you have horror stories for some mission critical process that was dependent on an Office application? Not a database. Not a database. Not a database. Practice.
Does connecting to the database through Access to do your modifications count?
So, yes. So Access can store data in Access, right? Mm-hmm. It can also store data in what's called a globally linked table, which means it's just referencing a real grown-up database in like a SQL server, but it's still going through the 32-bit jet engine, which will never become 64-bit, and is specifically designed without concurrency in mind. This is documented. I have another presentation all about how Access is not a database. It's a database simulator for students. And so, yes, I would still say that Access, while great for students and maybe great for like rapid application development or prototyping, is not a grown-up tool to use for any mission critical data. And I have seen large energy sector companies, people's jobs and lives on the line, have to cease doing business because they fired their only Access developer who wrote this entire wall of spaghetti code in VB script. And now they can't pay their bills.
Yes. Now I've seen in the consultant world where I walk into, the QA's room and, there is the person who's doing all the customer support. And I'm like, hey, what are you doing? It's like, oh, well, this order is wrong. So I'm fixing it. And I'll look over their shoulder and it's Access. It's an Access application that they are using to modify sales orders for a very large, very valuable piece of software. And not only that, a lot of times they have their own custom business rules in there that are different than the business rules that we implement in the application. So just to create a little bit more disconnect, but that's how the company was started. It was the company that we inherited the software from was started by somebody who knew had a little bit of data science background. I mean, it was years ago, but they were technical. They got their hands on Access. They can create their local database. They figured out how to push it up to a grown-up database, and that's what they used. It stood around forever, and we had such a high turnover rate. Nobody ever knew it was even a thing as far as the developers were concerned. So that was a wonderful surprise.
Yeah. So what do you like when it comes to forms and things like that? Because that's the other thing I've seen, and I know people in nonprofits and stuff like that. And am I muted again?
No, I can hear you.
So we'll like.
No, I was going like that at the Borland database engine point of sale application that somebody just put in the chat. Michael Helms did.
Gross. But yeah, so we I've seen a lot of people in nonprofits just kind of having to do what they have to do, and like that's also some of why I'm bringing this up, just in case some people like that are watching and listening, because you know, I know the budget constraint is there, and it's difficult to get a programmer or get something going, and so what's maybe something somebody can do to get like a web form together um in a way that's, I guess, cheap and somebody can do it, like anyone can do it, or does that not exist, or like.
I'd say go find some students, like seniors in college who need a class project, and get a prototype done, and then maybe you can hand that off to some other volunteers. I mean, talk about the benefit of your nonprofit. I'm not talking about like a small business or something like that. I'm talking about like nonprofits. Unless you're like Guns for Kids, your nonprofit should have like a market out there for somebody who would be willing to donate.
I feel like there may
labor.
be a market for that out there.
Guns for Kids. Their slogan would be "Stand your playground." Anyway, unless you can't find something like that, but like at Southeastern, for example, the Envo folks are working with the junior and senior level classes to build starter projects for all sorts of companies. Go find go meet a professor like that. They're actually doing pretty decent prototyping work, and they're having people from industry check them out.
Yes, they actually just prototyped or just did a we just demoed their prototypes yesterday. They are meeting through Google Meet, and if you reach out to their CS department, especially if you're from the industry, that's something that they'll do. I know a guy that I work with, his brothers are actually sophomores, and he is their business owner. So he is an established professional. He understands architecture and patterns, and he's a fantastic developer, and he's actually mentoring that his brother's team, and he's the business owner, and he's also like their lead architect. So they're getting some good experience there, and they're always looking for realistic opportunities. I know I've been there. I've done those projects. I did mine for, at the time it was High Power Consultants, now Invoke. So I was among that crowd.
Yeah, and that's something good. Like, look, man, everybody who's on the call, who's in school or fresh out of school or all of that, like, there's most definitely a place for you. And like, I know it's very difficult to find work right now, but these are absolutely the things that you can do right now, to build up experience and get your foot in the door and all of that.
Let's face it, you're not probably going to be given a lot of opportunities to design an architect early in your career, right out of school.
Yeah,
so
this isn't like William isn't dream killing right now. He's just being honest, and it's for real. And it's the dream job isn't going to come right out the gate. It takes some time, and it takes these kinds of projects. But let me see.
All right. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions or horror stories?
So I got one that came up in chat that I'm kind of looking at. Was it Jeremy was saying he was wondering if the specific instance in England would have happened if they had used Rose. And here's the thing: this is what I think happened in this situation. Is if anybody's ever seen these questionnaires, these healthcare questionnaires that come from the government. They are super wide, and I'm wondering if it's a situation where the thing was so wide that they were looking at it like, well, maybe it doesn't fit this way, so we'll just pivot it. And still not a solution, but I don't know, and I just wonder how you would ever report on that.
Yeah, it may be because there was like more than 256. I don't know. I don't know why they would have done that. I think that's the lesson here. We don't know why they would have done that. That thing I just pasted in the chat is wrong. It left out the exponents, but yeah, the limit to the number of columns in that XLS workbook that they were using is 256. So they were cutting off anything that it exported over that, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't the DBAs back these things up? That's another problem with having your Access databases and your Excel spreadsheets store mission critical data. Then you're reliant on somebody's coffee not spilling on their desktop where that file is stored, right? And you're relying on IT doing file level desktop backups, as opposed to, like real grown-up disaster recovery strategies that include full, differential, and incremental backup strategies. So it's all because of the metric system. Yeah, Chris, because an English column is 2.5.
Oh man, they can only hold so many milliliters of data.
Gallons to.
All right.
Stacy raised an important thing about, or no, somebody said something about drag and drop. About there were a bunch of applications. Who put it? Michael Helm said worked for a multi-billion-dollar company. Used the Borland database engine. That's terrifying. And then somebody else said something about drag and drop stuff. Yeah, Jeremy Knight said that when I was a consultant, I walked into a company that hired all devs right out of college. Back in the web forms days, their entire app is built through drag and drop.
Yeah.
As a developer, explain why that's a bad thing.
As a developer, is built through drag and drop. Imagine somebody having a tool, say like an object relational mapper, that would generate some kind of code like SQL very, 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 very poorly, but like to where Entity Framework actually looked good. A lot of times that's what happens. So, but yeah, it's a lot on the UI side. It makes just things. And it's not just run SQL once. It's actually no. I guess in Entity Framework would run it once. Oh yeah.
Drag and drop is the devs, like Entity Framework is the DBAs.
That's nice. What I was going for. So
I'll chime in on that point Jeremy made, cutting together. I've seen a lot of instances of cut and paste as opposed to drag and drop, where you're looking at some code, see, okay, this is how you did this. And then over here, your code just completely changes to something else. And then over here, you have a completely different way of doing the same thing. And then I can remember one instance where it dawned on me, oh, this person just went to Stack Overflow. How do you do this? Okay, and cut and pasted that solution over into their code. And then a little while later, they changed in a completely different way of doing it. I think it was actually like, it was a little web app, and they probably had 4 or 5 different ways of querying the database. Like they had a little bit of Entity Framework mixed in there. They had some old school ADO.NET where they were writing SQL statements on the fly. And I'm thinking, why not one data layer and all? And then the client said, well, we had an intern or somebody work on this for a while. And then I realized, yeah, they were just pasting everything off the internet. It kind of worked, I guess. But I think that, similar to what Jeremy pointed out, you do see a lot of that.
Yeah.
Of that cobbled food together.
Yeah. Especially when you get a lot of younger developers together. That was our experience at my first consulting company I was at. It's just, they got them in and out so quick, we didn't know what we were doing. we learned a lot of lessons the hard way. And we didn't have a DBA. You know, we had a guy who
I'm sorry for that.
who ran the database.
I was waiting for it.
And I mean, I've seen other companies do a lot of smaller companies start off that way. It's like you don't get your DBA in there, and whenever you do, they probably pull all their hair out and then they run away.
You got an IT guy. What you need a DBA for?
That exactly how that went. That is exactly how that went. We had an IT guy. He stood up the database. That was it.
Yep.
Jeremy put in the chat, Ryan's 100% right. The biggest issue with drag and drop is maintainability. Imagine touching every page if you move SQL Server instances. Is that because each thing you dragged and dropped would have its own connection string? Is that the case?
Well, just more like consistency of code. You know, it's like I said, this app that I encountered, it basically did function, but I just, you know, you want your code to be consistent, I guess, and not. And this was specifically like data access. Like, you know, they just didn't commit to one type of one method of getting their data. It was just all over the place. And so it becomes a point where maintainability and all it's difficult when you have all these different types of methods of doing things, you know. And if you're in a multi-team project, you're going to have that where people are going to do things differently. But this was a small little app, you know. It was just cobbled together. So,
yeah.
William, there's a guy that you and I used to work with, Chris Miskowitz. He always said he said one day he was saying something like, I said, I don't think we want to touch this. This is just ugly, whatever. And then he said, well, you know, anytime you touch code, you ought to try to leave it looking a little bit better than how you found it. So
the Boy Scouts motto for code.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a big one.
You know, so I would just go in there and like, I don't, you know, this is just messy and non-consistent. I'll just clean it up, whatever. Then, you know, you have to go back and work on it again. Then, you know, if you made improvements to it, then it helps you, you know, too.
Yeah.
Well, all right, guys. I think we're hitting time.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, I wanted to say thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate you guys coming out. We really appreciate William and Brian and Ryan for coming and speaking. Thank you guys so much for coming by. It was really awesome.
Hey, look, we need to get more of you folks who are really chatty to speak at our next time we do a short format speaker. I think next month we actually have full-length speakers lined up, right?
Yeah, we were gonna go
SQL
for
we're
gonna do SQL and we were gonna do .NET. I think we're gonna have the two have their own thing again.
Yeah.
So we got that coming up. If anybody wants to talk SQL stuff, .NET stuff, that's coming up, and we'd like to do these short form talks, and we're kind of experimenting with this. If anyone wants us to do meme reviews, you know, we're okay. We could do that too. You know, we're all YouTubers now.
Brian's going to present his next presentation walking alongside his car while it idles down his driveway.
But yeah, everybody, y'all hit that subscribe for notifications. Smash that like button. Ring a ding a ding that bell icon, and stay tuned for more. You guys have a good night. Peace.
Thanks, everybody.